Hi everyone, I'm Mike. I'm going to screen share in a moment, but just quickly set my stall a little bit. So my name is Mike Chappell. I work for a company called CloudThing in the solutions space. I'm recovering from a cold. I have lots of little sticks that tell me it was only a cold, so no one get worried about that. But I do cough occasionally, so apologies if I go on mute or do this. I spent the first part of my career, first decade or so, doing what was called MI back then, or data warehousing or business intelligence. I spent a lot of time doing that. And then, 10, 12, a number of years ago, switched on to Dynamics, switched on to CRM as it was back then, onto Dynamics. And I've been loving life on that ever since. As a result of my background and having spent a lot of time in data, I really liked SQL Server. I spent a lot of time writing SQL queries or optimizing other people's SQL queries because I'm a geek. So when I discovered Data Export Service, it was a great way of getting all the data that I've got in my CRM instance and be able to run a query on it. I thought, this is amazing. I'm in love with this thing. And then I got the vibe from one or two people on this call a little while back that it was ill-fated, not long for the world. So I started to look around. At the time, there was something called Export to Data Lake. So I had a little play with that. Wasn't massively impressed, if I'll be honest, because I still like to take that data and put it somewhere where I can run queries against it and be the geeky Mike. But it has moved on since then. And I think very recently I was taught by someone in my company how old-fashioned I was and how ridiculous my viewpoints were. So I asked them to prove it. So they showed it to me and I'm like, okay, I'm convinced. And then I was having a chat with Neil. And I think Neil was of a similar opinion to me. And I said the same thing to him. And he said, no, don't show me now. Show me at the user group. So that just goes to show, don't have conversations with Neil where you're teaching new. So what I'm going to do is, so as well as working in solutions in Dynamics world and Power Platform world, I'm also the trustee of my local theatre. So I live in a town called Nuneaton. We've got a theatre in the town called the Abbey Theatre. I'm a trustee there. Arts people generally aren't techies. Some of them do lights and sound, and that's fairly technical, but they're not necessarily up there with the techie world. I realized how much money we're spending on MailChimp and things like that, and realized, for those that don't know, Microsoft actually have a really good not-for-profit offering. And I think we've got something like 10 free Power Apps licenses. I think even the full-fledged CE, as it was when I first looked into it, was £26 a license, which is, I can't remember what it was back then, but it was something like £70 a license back then. So that's really good. And they give you $3,500 worth of free Azure credits every year. So I've started to look at what do we do within the theatre that we could probably automate a little bit of, because we're volunteers. We don't like to spend too much time doing it. So I'm using that as the use case this evening. I have specifically created a model app recently to try and track what shows are on. So that's what I'm going to do this evening. I'm going to show you kind of an actual use case. I've come up with a use case of something I want to do. So it should be fine for the recording, because I've gone through and there isn't any PII in here that isn't already on our website. So we should be fine, but I'll quickly share the screen. He says confidently. Is that coming through? Or is it not? This could be the end.
Yes, Mike. Yeah, we got that.
Thank you. I was looking for some level of app. You're now over there. So if I'm looking over here, I'm looking at you. So this is the this is the theatre. This is the site we've got at the moment. And here's our very simple web page. I'm looking at Power App Portal, but here's our very simple web page saying what's coming on. And here's my work in progress. Please don't judge me. I know there's no icons. It's not a proper app yet, but this is just something I thought we could use this evening to try and kind of give some indication of what it is that you can do with this. So this is a whole bunch of things that are coming up at the theatre soon. We use a system called Ticket Source to sell our tickets. Another thing that maybe we'll get around to doing our own version of at some point. But Ticket Source, they have an API. And so we've started to pull in through Power Automate, we started to pull in all the ticket sales. So if you look over here, you can see, broadly speaking, these are the same list of events that we already knew we had. And we can see the dates of the events are going to come on. My favorite bits are the bookings for those events, and even as far as the number of seats. So as well as faffing about in the theatre, I also do a little bit of direction. And I'm involved with the one at the very bottom there, something called Young Frankenstein, which is a Mel Brooks comedy. It's a comedy musical. Please come to Nuneaton and see it. But the use case we've got this evening is I'm going to try and work out how many seats for Young Frankenstein we've sold. And you'll notice that there's actually 4 hikes. So that you've got events that link to dates, that link to bookings, that links to seats. So you've got a reasonable level of hierarchy with how ticket source is put together. And we absolutely can do things with views and linkages within within Dataverse, within Power Platform, that exposes that quite nicely to the end users. But going back to my geek roots, I want to go into SQL and I want to run a query and I want to see how many seats, and I want to throw that in and I want to get a pie chart to see how well I'm doing against everybody else. So that's my use case. A quick note about data export service: it is still up and running. I have still got it on here. I think I've got my emergency PowerPoint over here, which I won't go full screen on, but I took a couple of screenshots on this just in case we couldn't get the live demo working. So this is kind of a link to my data export service that exists at the moment. Interesting fact that our kind of Dataverse at the moment is about 2.5 gigs. Data export services version of that database, so obviously it's going to have different indexes and not necessarily all the system tables, that's taking up 745. It's a charity and I'm tight, so I went with the cheapest possible, smallest SQL database I could find at the time, and that's costing me about £4.64 a month, and I've been paying for that for goodness knows how long, but out of the freebies that Microsoft give me. And I like that. That's SQL. I can run in there and write this query very quickly. I know what I'm doing. So when I knew that wasn't going to be there anymore, so Microsoft, I think, announced in December last year that they were deprecating data export. So, and is unusually, by my standards, I think this is unusually quick. It's going away in November this year. So they announced November last year, data export service is going, and it's going away by November this year. You can still use it up until that date. And when it goes away, you effectively still have the database, obviously, because it's yours, but you're out of support. And there's no guarantees what will happen after that date. So it's something that we all need to be cognizant of, especially if we're in the process of using data export service at the moment. So I've got a friend who's been working on a project for a long period of time. They've built data export service into their deliverable. They're about to go live. They created a new environment last week and they went to AppSource to add data export service into AppSource, and it's not there anymore. They couldn't add it, even though it's in their earlier downstream environment, so their UAT environment and their dev and test environments. So what they've had to do already, even though it's not November yet, they've had to go to Microsoft support to say, I know you're deprecating it. I know it's only there now for pre-existing installations. However, this is a new environment in the same chain installations. Please come and help us. So just an early warning, if you're in the same situation, you might, and you do need data export service for the next X months, you might be in a similar situation. Reach out to Microsoft support. So anyway, it's going away. I had to get used to it. And I went away and I played with it. So if we go and have a look, the way you go and link is in Make. That's not it. That's it. So if we go into make.powerapps.com, one of my favorite websites in the world, and you see the data section here, where you used to see an option down here that I think it was called Export to Data Lake. It's now been renamed Azure Synapse Link. It still does an export to data lake, and we'll have a go at that in a second.
Mike, sorry to interrupt you. Would you be able to just zoom your screen in a little bit for the old folks at the back, like myself?
How's that?
Wonderful, thank you.
That's yes. I possibly should have realised the resolution of this monitor before I shared it, or got a better one. I will need to do the. Remind me when I forget. I'll do it into here as well. So
no worries. Thanks.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and actually create. We're going to create a data lake. We're going to create the Synapse Analytics workspace. We're going to link them into Dataverse, and we're going to have a go at trying to do my use case, get back how many ticket sales I've got so far. But before we do, a word to the wise, and something I didn't appreciate. So I'm sure everyone knows, or most people know, that in Azure you've got all sorts of different availability sets and regions and zones and things like that. My CRM instance, my Dynamics instance, is in UK. And when I created it, CRM 11, I get to specify it's in the UK. You don't get a choice about whether you're in UK South or UK West like you do in Azure. You just say, I want it here, and it's provisioned for you in the background. And you don't really need to know if it's in UK South or UK West, because if it falls over, never has, but if it falls over, it will roll over and you'll be fine. From the point of view of the data lake, you do actually need to know the residents, where your Dataverse is, where this environment is, and it can vary between environments within the same tenant. And it's not exceedingly obvious where you're hosted, but if you go to Azure Synapse Link, of course, it's going to go super slow this evening. There we go. You can see my couple of exports when it was just export to data lake. I've not deleted them. I'm using them for reference later on, but we're not touching them tonight. So I go to Azure Synapse Link, I go to New Link, and immediately it says, select the storage account that you want to use. By the way, you're in UK West. which was brilliant because the first time I did this, all of our stuff, we built dozens and dozens of Azure artifacts. They're all in UK South. My environment, I just discovered, was in UK West. So you've got two options at that point. You can go and move all your stuff from UK South to UK West, which we couldn't do because there were some things we had that were only in UK South at the time. Or you can go back to Microsoft support and beg, and they will. I don't know if this is it's because this was a big client, but I'm assuming it's safe for everyone because this is a limitation. They do move, and they did move us from UK West over into UK South. So bear that in mind. So I'm going to run over. There's two things we need. We need a data lake, a container, somewhere to shove the data when it comes out of Dataverse, and we need that Synapse analytical workspace. Otherwise, you'll end up. In fact, I'll show you. So we'll jump over to a portal now. Hopefully, it's big enough for the older eyes. And we're just going to create a resource. Storage account is down the bottom here, so it's nice and easy to find. We're going to select our subscription. I've got multiples going back to Microsoft's throwing money at the theatre. This is amazing. They've just rolled over the 2021. We're going to select a resource group. Here's one I made earlier, but I promise you it's empty. I was deleting loads of stuff and I forgot that one. We need to give our storage account a name, and I seem to remember it's UD5. I think it has to be all lowercase, no dashes. Nothing that would make it easier to read is allowed in that space. We need to select our region, and you notice here it's gone to East US. Ignore all the recommended ones because our environment is down here in UK West, and it has to be there. It simply won't work if it's not. We don't need to go premium, not just because I'm tight, but we genuinely don't need to do it. The recommendation is obviously geo-redundant, but this is a throwaway thing for me, so I'm just going to go locally redundant. Before you go ahead and hit review and create, there is one thing you have to do for Data Lake that isn't a default, and that's this thing here where it says Data Lake Storage Gen 2. You need to tick this box, enable hierarchical namespace. If you don't do that, it simply won't appear in your drop down in a minute. So we'll tick the box, we'll hit review and create. It'll do a little bit of sanity checking. I'm just going to sanity check myself and make sure I'm creating it in the right place, in the right subscription. I think I am. We'll all laugh at me if I'm not. This won't take too long to spin up. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a container. It's not actually going to have anything in it at that stage. So you can put all sorts of things in a container. There's queue storage, table storage, blob storage, which is what we're going to use. So if you want to have, if you've got one already that's in the right place at the right time, you can probably do it with what you've got. If you want to compartmentalize it like I do, I create a specific resource group to hold each function in, and I would deploy into that, and I'll try and make sure this is only used for this thing. And there we go. I spoke long enough that it exists. So if we hit go to resource, we've now got our in our Explorer, we've got our ability to drive around inside our new place. I've called it Data Lake because this is the only thing I'm going to use it for. You'll notice there's nothing in there at the moment, but you can once we go and do something in a minute in Make, you'll start to see it in here. So I'm going to leave it open. So we're now going back to Make. We're going to hit New Link. We're not at the moment. We're going to do this in a second. Don't worry. We're not at the moment going to do that. I'm just going to show you the experience you will have if you don't tick that box. We're going to select our sponsorship. We're going to select the right resource group. It has automatically found that, and it is the only one. And if I hit next now, it should just work, but it won't. Because there's one thing you need to do, which isn't, again, the default and isn't immediately obvious, and I've got to remember where to click. Where's it gone? Okay, access control. So the user that exists in make.powerapps, this is the info account for the theatre, needs to have permissions. It needs to have owner permissions and blob storage container permissions. It should be the default, but never mind. So when I created it, so I very quickly need to put owner permissions, and it doesn't take long. On that account, and I'm going to assign that. And then I'm going to add the blob. It's weird that you need both, but you do. Blob data, storage blob data contributor. And again, I'm going to add that to, I can't type. There we go. Add that to that container. So I need to make sure that's finished. One role assignment is, I haven't pressed the button. That's why that one doesn't work. It doesn't take long. There we go. It's done. So now, that's the gotcha that caught me the first time I did this. It is somewhere in the documentation. I've got some links up here, which we'll throw into the chat later about what the playbook is for deprecation, what the frequently asked questions are, and a guide to doing this that does specifically mention that. So we've now added that user in. This is the moment of truth. I'm going to hit next. And you get to choose. You can either tick this box and send all your data over, or you can just pick specific tables to send over to Data Lake. I'm just going to pick one for the sake of speed. And a quick note on a feature that I noticed recently, which I'm going to make a huge amount of use of. You may or may not. If you click Advanced now and click Advanced again, you get this option to append only. So you can change how you partition your data. So whether or not you have CSV files that are grouped by year or month, that might be useful to you. But the append only feature is really, really useful for me, because what that does, the naming is slightly counterintuitive. It doesn't append, it will create rows and append rows, but it will also store your history. So, if you go into audit history inside of Dynamics, you can see a view on it, and it's, it works, it's okay. And if you went into, I can't remember in I'm getting data export service or on-prem confused, but there was an audit table you used to be able to query, certainly in on-premise. I can't remember if it made it into data export. But I very often in projects need to see what a record used to be. And looking at that for a specific record, nice and easy. Looking at that holistically, this time last year, how many records did we have in state active? That's not very easy to do holistically. So this new feature that's under advanced, for those that have a similar need to me, if you go in and tick that, every record that gets created in Dynamics will still flow through to the data lake, but also every change will. So don't rely on your GUIDs being unique. So if you've only got one row in the table and you change it 10 times, you will have 10 rows in your data lake, and only the most recently created one, there's a column at the beginning, we'll see in a minute, only the most recently created one is the active one if you go to Dynamics, but in there in the your past history is every state that row has been in at that time. If you delete the row, there's an extra column added at the end. If you tick append here, if you delete the row, there's an extra column added at the end that says something like is deleted or deleted true. So if you delete records as well, you've still got them in your audit history. I'm not going to do that this evening just to make things a mite simpler, but for me, that was a really big deal. So now when I hit save, if I'm lucky, no, it definitely should work unless I've missed something. Okay, it didn't. I don't think I've missed something, but I will go and check. Access control, role assignments, owner, yes. Storage blob data contributor, yes. Let me just check and make sure I haven't got those wrong, because it might be the demo gods and it might be the idiot at the wheel. And I did at least write it down. Storage blob data contributor, storage blob data. Yeah, okay, I have done it right. So if at first you don't succeed, try exactly the same operation and hope for a different result. Maybe actually just refresh this page in case it is caching anything. Apologies for that. Hope right. 2020 sponsorship. Yes. That. Next. Just try a different table for the sake of it. Okay, so I'm just going to pinch a quick look at this. No, it's definitely not doing anything, and I definitely do have permissions. Okay. Oh, one more try. I did this about 2 hours ago, and it was absolutely fine, but this is just to punish me. I am correcting to Biram. Do shout out to staff. Can't imagine that'll have a different result. We'll try. Right. So
I was just going to say, have you allowed your client IP through on the firewall setting?
Not specifically, but I think this is because this is effectively Azure, and this is effectively Azure. And I haven't done that in the past, and it's worked just fine. So what I might do is just, because I've used the same name I was using earlier, give it a delete this one and give it a slightly different name.
Let's diagnose the issue live.
Yeah, there's nothing.
So it was a 403, wasn't it? That looks like some kind of security issue.
Yeah, yeah. And I did once hit that new data lake button before I'd created the. Did I not just delete that? I did. Good. Okay. So we'll create a new one. Container. Correct. Sponsorship. Correct.
We're just going to keep going until you get it right, Mike. So, you know, we've got no time limits.
No, nobody here. No one's going home until you do this.
No one's going home.
Oh, so CRM test is already taken. Of course it is. I wouldn't have been surprised if that one had been already taken as well. UKOS standard. I'm going to let it keep geo redundant ones.
Advanced setting.
And hierarchical. All of that is fine. All of that is fine. Yeah. And then we wait for the minute, and I have a quick drink. Well, it deploys, and I'll definitely make sure that I add those two user roles in before we do the initial try this time.
Whilst we're waiting for that minute, has anybody got any questions they want to jump in with quickly?
I just want the pressure to stay high.
I was just going to say, Mike, not to distract you whilst you're doing this, but you mentioned earlier about the playbook for moving away from data export service. It goes through these steps, doesn't it?
It probably does. So,
off the top of my head.
Go back to home there. I'll just double check myself. So let me do the two I know I need. Blob contributor, wasn't it? Oh. Okay. So the role assignment for blob contributor and the role for owner both added to that account. Brill, we'll go back. Can you remember whereabouts it was in the playbook?
I have to admit, no, it's not looked at it for a while, but I thought it stepped through it all.
Oh, it does look like, so that looks right. Oh, okay. So that's showing you the that's the screen we're on. That's the screen we're on, and that's assuming it's worked. So let's just check it hasn't. I wonder if it's a searchable PDF. Maybe not. It hasn't got the word blob in it, so maybe it doesn't mention that. But that's advanced options. No. Okay. Well, we'll double check if it doesn't work this time. If not, I have taken some screenshots of when it did work. So we're going to go to Azure Synapse Link. Taking a little bit longer to run. In fact, I could probably show you one of those existing ones. It worked. I don't want to jinx it, but I did jinx it. Failed to create container. I wonder if it has actually created the container. So it's right. It's definitely got further that time by using exactly the same approach, and it's telling me that it's failed to create the container. but we can actually see the container there. So it hasn't. I'll just hit save again. Maybe if we delete the container it's already got. That's interesting. Is there any more going on? No. Well, we've eliminated the fact it could be the permissions because we've given exactly the same permissions. It might just have picked a bad time. Go on. Let's take the first one. Right, okay, so we'll go back to here and I will try here's one I made earlier because I think I have got elsewhere data lake containers. So if you look, it's created, this was the one I did earlier last year, I think, one of those. And if we go into the storage container, you'll notice there are some of the, I can show you that one, I think. So there are containers here, sorry, directories within the container. And if we go into one of the directories from the container, you can see there's a CSV file. And if we open up that CSV file, I'm picking the one that hasn't got user details in. It should, and this is all your data that you're familiar with in Dynamics. So I think this is just a list of songs that were in one of the shows. Yep, it is. So that's all my data. So,
to zoom in a bit, Mike, for us old guys.
Well, you're looking at GUIDs. You're looking at GUIDs and dates. But this, yeah, I promise you, this is all the rows that were in that table when I first set up that data lake. And you'll notice as well, sorry, going back to it, that you don't have column headings. So it goes straight into the data. And like I say, if you hit append, you'd have multiple rows per GUID. I didn't for this one. It's one row per GUID. So if you think about that in Dynamics terms, if you go into a record, you create the record, it'll appear in here. There's a soft SLA of 15 minutes. In my experience, it's always been within 2 or 3. And if I'd set I had the working link set up, I would have showed you that. But yeah, it's always been within 2 or 3 minutes. But the SLA is around 15. I don't know how. I think when they say soft SLA, I think they mean it will be 15 minutes or less. However, it's not. You can't charge us any money for it or ask for any money back. But yeah, in my experience, it has always been quicker. So if you create a row, it'll appear in here within a couple of minutes normally. If you edit a row within Dynamics, again within a couple of minutes, it'll appear within your CSV, and it will change the row. So if you're using this for an onward journey where you're pulling this into ETL or you're sending this off to AWS or off to another product, just be aware that the row that you have will have changed. And that's why there's some things. No, I don't need to change that. Within the container, you notice this snapshot bit here. So within the snapshot is a view of the data. So if the data is frequently changing and you're worried about whatever onwards job you have, accessing data from a CSV which is changing, if you go to the snapshot one, I believe that's refreshed every hour. So as long as whatever you've built can consume, in this case, 26K's worth of data within an hour, then you'll be absolutely fine. So you can point yourself at the snapshot version of the CSV. If you're using it anywhere else, the onward version, then you definitely want to kind of point at the most recent one of these. How many of these you have will depend on how much data has been created or updated in the time frame since you set up the data lake, and depending on how you've partitioned the data. So if it's broken up by month and you've edited you edited data every month and you've had it for a year, you can expect 54 CSVs. If you've done it in a yearly partition, you'd see 1 CSV, which is very frequently updating. Hopefully that makes sense. And I will hit refresh here and just try one more time. If not, we'll go to some slides which are not as exciting. Unless anyone's got an idea. In fact, no, what we can do, we'll just try it quickly, but we'll still go away and create the Synapse. That's a long hourglass. It's long enough to tease me. It's also long enough to make me bored. Okay, I'll leave that going for a sec. We're going to create another resource. So what we're doing now is we're assuming that's going to work, and we're going to go ahead and create our Synapse Analytics. Again, you need to be cognizant of what zone you're in. So I'm going to select my sponsorship to pay for it. I'm going to select, we'll go through payments in a minute, by the way. We're going to select the resource group. It wants another resource group for the things that it creates. Going to let it create a new one. Workspace name, again, has to be lowercase. And unique. That my keyboard is in UK West. Account name should find, there it is. File system name, I'm going to create a new one specifically for Synapse stuff, because you don't necessarily only ever want to use, oh, hit caps. You don't necessarily only ever want to use this for, you know, Dataverse stuff. You might want other things. There is no specific gotcha. You don't have to go through all those bits and pieces, but it does take, the reason I've jumped ahead as well is because it does take a little bit of time to create. But we're about to jump into pricing whilst it creates, so that you're not sat here staring at an hourglass for ages. I just want you to note that number. So the SQL Server, I don't know why I looked that up. The SQL Server, the estimated query cost is £3.73 per terabyte. Just remember that when we go away and actually look at what the documentation says. Hey, it worked. Oh, see, all you have to do is be patient, and this is why I struggle. But if we look, and please work for Mike, it did create, it has put the account table across, 52 rows went across, and that happened whilst we're talking building our analytics space. So if you now change your mind and you want to add another table to that, which I'm going to do because that one contains PII, and try and add our original table back in, it should save, it will create, if we go back to our storage account, if you go to the container, you'll notice within this folder where all Dataverse appears, in a moment or two, you'll see this additional table appear. It says like magic. And also I'm going to try and keep an eye on that deployment, but that does take 5 or 6 minutes. So whilst things are running, I want to quickly talk about, and it's probably worth me bringing up my PowerPoint at this point. But first off, if you go to, obviously you can use Microsoft Azure Calculator, everyone loves that. But if you go to the Azure Synapse Analytics pricing page, it is useful, but I just want to give you a little warning. So if you look at the page initially, you see numbers like this and you start to get scared, at least I certainly did. You start to click about, you can still find even bigger numbers. That's interesting, it's not available in UK West. But the number we actually care about is 3 tabs in, and it's the data warehousing cost. And what you're actually being charged for is the terabytes of data that you process. And you notice when we went on that screen a moment ago, we specifically selected UK West, and it told us it was going to be £3.73. This page is still telling me it's £4.51. And if I bounce around, so it's £4.51 UK West, £4.67 in, so it's 66 in UK South. But if we go over to Europe, it will show us that £3.73 number. So I'm not certain if it's this page, which is a bit wonky, or the estimated cost within Azure, which is a bit wonky. So I just need to put a whole load of work through it so I can actually see what price I'm actually charged, but word to the wise on that. So as I mentioned in my presentation, the cost depends upon location, and it's based on the amount of data you're processing. So how do you know how much data you process? Well, when you run a query, it will tell you at the end. So there's a little example of a query down here that tells me, but it's broadly speaking the amount of data that in order to run your query, it runs away and gets. Any kind of temporary storage it creates, where it's putting the query together, the query execution plan together, and returning that back to you. The other thing to note, Synapse has a minimum query size of 10 megabytes. So if you do a really, really tiny query, like many of mine are, and it's only 570K or something like that, the smallest unit of charging is 10 megabytes. That sounds like a swizz, but if you put it into context, if it's charging me £3.73 per terabyte, that's £0.004 or half a penny per gigabyte. And so the minimum query cost is actually 0.00004. To put that into real terms, little queries like I tend to run, I'd have to run 250 of those to spend a penny. So my belief that Synapse was ridiculously expensive, I've got to run 250. I've got to run my little analysis 250 times before I get into trouble. Well, get into trouble spending a penny. Bear in mind that theirs used to cost me £4.60 no matter how much I spent. The last thing to mention is your storage. This will vary wildly from implementation to implementation, but going to my earlier example, my 5 gigabyte cheapo database cost me £4.64. If I'm buying storage from Azure, so this is the data lake, the container that we had problems with earlier, that 5 gig would cost me about 11 cents. Now, there's a few more pennies that you might get charged depending on how much data you put in or how frequently you access it or do it. But broadly speaking, doing what I used to do for £4.64 on my very, very tiny, think of your own scale, but my very, very tiny use case, it would go from £4.64 down to 20p. And that's doing quite a lot more than I probably do normally. Any questions on the, I love to talk about Microsoft costings. Please ask me questions on Microsoft costings. Also conscious, Neil, that I don't know how much time I've got because I've been repeating some of these actions.
Well, we're not necessarily time bound too tightly because there's not another presenter. So just keep going.
Keep going until you start to notice that everyone has gone. But I can't see the screen. I won't know. Right, it looks like we've now had a successful deployment, so that's great. I'm going to go back to this Dataverse container, and I'm going to unlink it. So if we go back to, because we've already done it once, and I'm using the same data lake for the sake of time. So I'm going to unlink, and I'm going to delete the data lake file system. So what this means, so be careful of this, I'm unlinking my data lake from Dataverse, and in doing so, I'm deleting everything. That shouldn't be a problem in theory, because if all your data is in Dataverse, then all you're doing is removing a copy of it. However, if you've got that audit history on and you remove this, that audit history isn't in as easily accessible storage. And when you recreate it again, you'll only get the audit history from the point you create it again. So if you do press this and you were reliant on all that, you've lost it. This doesn't take very long. Well, I've said that already this evening. And we should start to see it disappear from inside of, oh yeah, sorry, I said I've added the extra table in. There's just proof that the extra table did create while I was wittering about Synapse. So it genuinely only took 2 or 3 minutes. That's now gone. So I refresh these containers. They've gone. He says, yes, they've gone. So we'll do a new link, and this time we are going to tick the box that says connect to Azure Synapse Analytics because it's created. Same subscription, same resource group, which they both need to be in the same resource group. It's found the Azure Synapse workspace, and it's found the storage account for me. I don't need to change those options. I'm going to be hopeful that it does what it did last time and work instead of giving me a random error. And this time it's got one extra thing to do. So it's going to do what it did before, which is to create those containers, create the CSVs inside of that container, those blobs. It's also then going to link that back through to Azure Synapse. And then data will start to flow. A quick note, whilst it does that, I mentioned earlier that if we go back to the old one, the column headings aren't in the CSV for you. There is this thing called model JSON. So if I just click on that and download it, it does, if you need to use this data lake functionality without going into Synapse, you can go in here and you can retrieve, it's in JSON format, and there's a link here of all the tables that it pulls through. So you can, these are all the column headings and the type of columns. So although they're not in the CSVs, if you're using this for onward consumption, you can read this model JSON, pump that into whatever tool you're using, and that will tell the user of your CSVs what those columns actually mean. Did I buy enough time for this to work? Looks like it. So we go, yes, please work for Mike. Tables, oh, they've all gone across already. 621, yep, okay, that's right. So we've got 2 links at the top here. One that will take us to the data lake, which will be the screen we've already got open here. We go to containers. We should see all my tables have appeared with the model JSON. That's great, but we've now got the new bit, which is the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. This is the bit I was waiting for. This was the bit that made me happy. And you can see we've got here in the data section, we've got something called Lake Database, my environment's name, and the tables that I set up to sync. So that's great, and it's gone and read that model JSON, and you notice it's pulled in all the fields. And if I click on the table and select top 1,000 rows, first run will be so it hasn't remembered this. Oh, hang on, refresh. It'd be interesting. It should have automatically filled that in. I don't think it run it. Or does it? Yeah. It says it's deployed, but has it actually? So this database name here should be this name there. So I'll carry on talking whilst it's refreshing. So you get all of the data you've chosen to expose through make, or the tick boxes you've ticked, they will all come through. If we go and add a new row into, you see the last synced time. So if we go back to my model app and just create a random row in here, within a minute or two, I mean, I'm saying that, although it's not been kind to me this evening, within a minute or two, this sync will kick in, and you'll see, that time will change. And when we go into when we go into here and it actually does find its database, you'll see it come through. What would happen if I was to do that? Interesting. Let me just quickly run over to its resource. What did I call it? Forgotten already. Actually, I can do it from the resource group. Synapse Workspace. It has properly deployed, hasn't it? Yes, it has. It has done the SQL part. Status not available. Brilliant. Okay. So I am being hurt by the demo gods. But what would normally have happened by this point is it creates kind of a serverless dynamic SQL pool. And that's included within your cost of Synapse. And that's why you're getting billed, if you're using the serverless model, that's why you're getting billed per unit of processed data. So by terabyte of processed data, it's because it's using that kind of shared resource that allows you to draw on the SQL power as needed. And remember, this is SQL running against CSV files. But if you were needing to have a much more kind of known output, like a dedicated SQL resource, so there's a load more to Synapse, and the people in the call who love it will be sad that I'm only going through this very, very tiny part of it and that it's not working. There's a load more to it, and you can go in there and say, I would like this dedicated SQL server attached to this same Synapse, and I'm going to, in that, put a whole bunch of other business data. Effectively, I'm going to run maybe my MI database, my BI database is going to run in Azure SQL. I'm going to attach that to Synapse, and then actually I've got all my Dataverse data here, and I've got all my business line of business unit data over here in its own dedicated SQL pool, and you can use whatever your ETL tool of choice is to move things around or create flows is what I tend to use, because they're my favorite thing to move stuff around, certainly in small doses. The other cool thing you can do, this isn't going to work, it has, okay. Don't highlight part of your query and expect it to work. F5 works as well for those of us who are in the SQL Server Management Studio buffs. F5 doesn't refresh the whole page, just refreshes this thing. This will take a few seconds, hopefully not more than 12. There we go. So this is the result in SQL of the table that I've pulled in. So if I'll just edit this SQL on the fly and just bring back one column and not just the top 100. And hit F5. There you go. There's all the names of all the events that we've got going on in here. The next thing I wanted to show, so my original use case, so I've pulled in all these different tables. I wanted to know how many tickets my show has sold. I'm going to try here's one I've made earlier, and the assumption that everything's named the same, because watching me type, as you've realized this evening, is painful. Hopefully, here's one I've made earlier, I have used the same names. The only part I'm not certain, it has, there we go. So we've now joined the events to the dates, to the bookings, to the seats, and I'm saying give me back every show name and how many seats it's sold. So I can find out that whoever Lockett Academy is, they've sold 196 seats. The Folk Opera sold 138. They're on this weekend. That's fair enough. International Women's Day sold 48. And that's great because you notice International Women's Day has sold 48 tickets. The male strippers have only sold 42. So I think that's a win for morality. Another quite cool thing you can do, it's just a simple function, but you can go in here and get a Power BI-like chart. So I could very quickly, if I wanted to, put the show name down there, and I can get a line graph that gives me a visualization of how things are selling. If it was me that had the most tickets, I might want to change that into a quick pie chart. If I want to send that off to the marketing committee at the theatre, I can save that down as a PNG, shove that into an email, and send it to everyone in marketing and go, there you go. Here's the sales situation as it stands at the moment. I would probably write something to do that for me in a regular basis. If we're at time, there's one more cool. I'll tell you what it is, and you can tell me if you've got enough time to do it. I'm mentioning this, Neil, because this is a use case I know is coming up for you at the moment. One of the things I quite like is I can now go into Data Lake. I could go in, I'll create myself a new container. I'll shove a CSV file into that container in Data Lake. So the use case that we're talking about, Neil, is say you've got 100,000 rows of data that's come from another division of your business, and you want to know those 100,000 rows are already in your Dataverse. There's numerous ways you can do that, but a very quick and cheap way you can do it now you've got all this set up, load that CSV file up into your Data Lake, just hit upload in the container and load it in. Go into here and map to that data from within Synapse. You can map to a CSV file, tell it your column headings with a tick box, press next, and then you can join your data that's in Dataverse to your data that's in a CSV file randomly somewhere in Azure, and just spit out the results. So you can do a left outer join and say, only show me rows that I don't already have in Dataverse. You could then use that SQL query in, say, Flow, and you can go into Flow and say, my data source for this is SQL Server, because you can utilize the connection string for this. I'll show you that in a sec. You can utilize the connection string for Synapse as a SQL Server. So you go into Flow, say, go to my SQL Server, run this left outer join on this table, and then all the results from that are the rows I don't have in my division's CRM, and then pump that into a Dataverse action, and then you get all the rows in. If people want to hang around, I'm conscious that I've gone over time a little bit for lag reasons and impatience reasons, but to answer a couple of questions that are likely to come up, yes, you can get to it from SQL Server Management Studio. All you have to do is find it in here and go to your properties, I think, and you'll have all sorts of endpoints. One of them is that if you put that into your SQL Server Management Studio as the connection, probably show you. Connect, yeah. If you put it in as your server name, come over to here. Oh, drag and drop fail. Put that in as your server name. Use AAD and put your username in as someone who's got permissions that you've given permissions into that space, and hit connect. That will work, and you can carry on using it like the old boy that I am. Can you use it in Power BI? Yes, you can. Within here, I think it's under Manage. And there's something called Linked Services. Go to Linked Services, hit New, connect to Power BI, tell it your workspace name, click Create, and then you can go across to your Power BI and query it through Power BI. Those were the two I was guessing were going to be asked. I'm now going to go back to the audience, and I will hang around afterwards and actually show you the particular use case, because I know Neil might be interested.
You might be helping me with that later.
Yeah, there might be a call about that next week.
We've got a few hands up. I think Joe's hand went up first. Do you want to unmute Joe and ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Thanks. Great session there. Just I'm starting to get familiar with Synapse myself, and just something that's probably worth checking is on that append only option. From what I've seen, is you don't actually get every change; you get a delta. So it's not actually like the audit log.
I think it's on save. So when you do an on save, so if you change 4 fields, you don't get. So if you change the field 4 times before you hit the save, then you would get the result of the end of that save. Is that what you mean?
No, that didn't work for me because I changed it a number of times. I changed the name to 1, 2, 3, 4, and then what get pushed across might be 1, 2, and 4.
So
probably worth having a look at it. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Anyway, thanks for the
I know I had a go. I did stick that into my slide because I tried to do exactly the same thing, but it did work. Where's the slide I did in it? So yeah, this is my attempt at doing the same thing, and it did work for me. But if it didn't work for you, then it would definitely be a kind of your mileage may vary situation. That if that is a distinct use case for you, and it is for me, so I will go away and check that.
Yeah, cheers.
I think Mark's got a question.
Thanks, Neil. Hi, Mike. Great to see you again. It's been a number of months. That was a really great session. Thank you. Quick question. With the blob storage, it's creating the CSV files. In Synapse, is it using the CSV files as a source of the data, or is it copying it in the background to SQL and storing it there as well?
This is a serverless one, so you can turn it off and on, and it spins back up again, and there's no resource that I can find associated to it. So I think there must be some element of caching or something going on there, because I can't imagine how it's working if it isn't. But from my knowledge, no, what you're actually paying for is just the data processed and the sucking of that data from the CSVs back into kind of like this. This is, I think, the cool bit of it is you're effectively querying CSV files with SQL Server.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to work out. My next part of the question was going to be, if it's creating a CSV file, then it takes 15 minutes from like a change, up to 15 minutes for change to get to the CSV. Is there another delay before you can see it in Synapse, or the moment in the CSV, can you query it in Synapse?
That's actually, I did do a row, didn't I? See if that linked. It's definitely been less than 15 minutes.
I don't think there's any SQL involved at all. Yeah, you literally, like he did, so he just did a separate CSV and queried over that. Because I've used a bit of this. I'm trying to find the link I used about getting the string map table, and you just basically do a query over a file in blob storage.
Oh, can you send string map base through?
Yeah, they're all there.
Do you know what it's called?
No, I'll find the link.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Presumably, you could use Azure Data Factory or anything else to query that SQL table, but it's just fetching the data through the CSV. The fact it's got the Synapse SQL there, you can use that for anything else.
You can, and you can query it against things. I think you can actually build your pipelines within here as well.
Yeah.
So you don't once you've got Synapse set up, you can kind of hone in on it and build your pipelines and your onward progression, all that stuff kind of within that same workspace.
Yeah, that's really cool for trying to automate stuff that's a nightmare to do in Fetch XML, but you could have like an ADF process running outside doing it all at SQL level.
Yeah. And if you're into Apache Spark and all those kind of big data kind of things, that's all built into the same kind of workspace.
Yeah,
I've barely touched the sides of it and gone over time, but I've gone from being why the hell would I want all my data in CSV files? That's clunky. To okay, I need a couple of weekends away with this data now. I need to go and have a play. So hopefully I've sparked a little bit of that in you guys as well. You're not quite as bummed about data export service going as I am now, or was.
I was somewhat terrified by the cost, so it's good to know that those first few tabs are a red herring.
I mean, who in marketing decided to put the 193 grand on the front page?
Yeah, exactly.
For £3.70. But given that also it's, my guess is the price that Azure is predicting for you is probably more reliable than a marketing web page.
Yeah.
So it's probably not even right on this point. So bear that in mind. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be using it now as well. Are there any more questions?
No hands up. Anybody else got any more questions for Mike, or before we wrap up, any questions?
I'm going to leave this on the screen and just do that thing I was mentioning about, in case anyone is interested in that.
I think I just mentioned that this is just my opinion, but like it blows my mind a bit that you can run SQL across CSV files, and it's really, really fast. I just don't know how that works. It's like some magic behind the scenes.
I'm about I'm about to do it again. So I'm going to upload a CSV file that I've got in my
This is just how data lakes are. So don't get hung up on the fact that it's CSV files. That's kind of the plumbing, right? It's just another data source. There's a SQL endpoint and you can query it, and you don't actually need to worry about how it's structured behind the scenes. That's all taken care of for you. So yeah, don't let the CSV-ness of it, which sounds a bit crap and like Excel to me.
Yeah,
don't let that sort of worry you. You can store massive amounts of data in it, and it's really, really fast. Sorry, Dean.
Sorry, Matt. I was going to say, did you show the model.json file that gets generated?
Yes.
Yeah, he did.
Yes, got it. There you go.
Yeah.
So there's obviously this is a small database.
Yeah, if you look at that link I put on there, if you look in the same folder in blob storage.
As in this one. Is that the link?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Or did you want me to actually go into the blob storage and go and have
I was just going to show. Yeah, I was just going to show where it was.
All right, let me just upload this one. So this is a random CSV that I created earlier. That's interesting. Earlier today, when I uploaded this CSV, it didn't ask me this, and today it is asking me this: how you want to authenticate against it. I did note at the weekend that if you don't do it as Azure AD, it was not, and I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it wasn't playing ball when I came on in here to do it. But let me go back to your point. Where did you want me to go? Sorry. In here.
Yeah, I think so. Well, if you go into one of the files, I think.
That'll be a decent one. It went to one of the CSVs.
It doesn't matter. It's on that. It's on that thing. It's in a folder called Athena or something. I think.
That was a higher level on this one.
Yeah, and then I think it's in the entity metadata files.
These ones. Oh, I've not looked at this. This is new for me. Let's download it and open it. There we go.
Yeah, that's the one. So again, don't know why they haven't actually bothered building this and calling it, making it a bit easy. But literally, the instructions on that page say write a query over this file. It gives you the lookup name for active and inactive on the status.
Oh, okay.
All the choices on there. You can
so it's like the string map table, like when you used to have to build views to get
exactly
the actual
like the
text
value.
Yeah.
But given that this is that's a JSON sat inside something that you can get to. So if you were using something like Flow, and you were a bit knocked off with the whole thing, you could just grab through the action that allows you to query storage containers in Azure. You could grab that JSON, pass the JSON in Flow, and then utilize that with the comment. But you can merge it in.
At the top of your SQL, you can write a common table expression to surface them as well.
Yeah,
is what I've done.
That's cool. I'm just going to quickly show that running SQL against. So I'm going to add a new database. Warning, it's in preview. Okay. Let's just publish that. Where's the publish button gone? The publisher will do it, I'm sure. What's going to be called? Database 1. Yeah, that's imaginative, Mike. Never mind. So I'm creating a new database that's in Synapse alongside of this Dataverse one. At the moment, there's nothing in here, but I'm going to add a table from Data Lake. I'm going to call it test 1. I'm going to link it to my workspace, tell it the folder I created, which was also called test. This is the weird bit. So you select your folder, and then you go back to exactly the same input, and now you're in that folder, and you select your CSV. So that's a mite clunky. I would have done that as maybe 2 different inputs, but you do that. Hit continue. It would detect the file type and do a little bit of scanning. It's successfully found my delimiters and terminators. It hasn't successfully realized that my first row's got headers in. So I'm going to tick that box, hit a little preview. Yes, it's got the column names in and the IDs. Brilliant. I'm going to pretend that this is a list of shows that the marketing department have. And I want to see if there's any missing. Going back to that use case we had, Neil. So I've now added that table in. I'm going to publish the changes. And depending on how patient I choose to be, I should then be, there we go, it's successfully published. So if we go over to here, you can see there's a test 1 table now in this database. This is that patient's problem again. There, oh no, it came back much quicker this time. Okay, so this is the problem I had at the weekend, and I thought that was related to whether or not you selected Azure AD as the owner. It may be patients, it may be something else, but this has definitely worked. I won't dwell on it this evening because I've kept you watching. Oh, there you go, patient. Patience is the thing. But you can now join that to your other database. So we've got, I think, this one. If I say that everything I want, this is my Dataverse table, and then everything in this Dataverse table I know is good. That random CSV that the marketing guys have sent me, they may or may not have all the events, and I want to know all the ones that I've got that marketing haven't got. So I'm going to do a left out of join. I'm going to try and remember how to do it on dot. Writing SQL on the fly, what can go wrong? Name, and I only want the ones where there isn't a row in that other table, so the one I've imported, and I want te dot name. What's the odds that's going to work first time? No, because I've forgotten how SQL works. Ha! Feel free to laugh at me. Is that the column name? Can someone help me? What have I done wrong? Oh, I haven't actually finished this. There we go. So this is a list of all the rows that, test came through. So that proved my use case from earlier. It does come through within 15 minutes. But yeah, this is a list of all the rows that are in my Dataverse that aren't in that CSV file I randomly uploaded into Azure a moment ago. So I've run queries. Not only have I run query on CSV file, I've run queries on CSV files from 2 different systems in 2 different containers. And I can now use the results from that. Well, I could turn it into a chart if I want to do in here, but that can go out into Power BI or into Flow, Data Factory, wherever it is that you need to be. So you're running off CSVs from anywhere, compiling that against Dataverse, and then using those combined results. Or in my case, I'm probably going to throw them back into Dataverse. But the next time I run that query, I'll get 0 results because I'll have imported them all or exported.
So, right, we are over time, but thank you very much. We've got one last question from Cole. I don't know whether you can see it in the chat.
I haven't had the chat up. I do apologize. Oh, there's people helping me, and I wasn't had the chat up. Damn it. What was the question? That's a really good question. And it's one of the notes I had at the end that I should remind people of. If you've got a really good security model in Dataverse, and then you expose your data outside of Dataverse to other systems, you are not going to be inheriting that security model. So if you decide to go and give, Joe Bloggs in your organization access to that data lake, but in Dynamics or in Dataverse or in your Power App, he hasn't got access to the rows. You exposed all that data to Joe Bloggs because he's got access to see all those rows. So you definitely need to give some serious consideration to who you would give access to that container for, because that container contains your environment's crown jewels, everything that they ever need to know. So only ideally you can give it to no one, or only give it to your DevOps guy that has sufficient permissions. And yes, however you're choosing, so if it's in Power BI or in SSRS, or however you're choosing to expose that data onwards, make sure that however you're exposing your data outside of Dataverse, it's adhering to whichever security model is appropriate to that audience. If it's the same one as it is in Dataverse, I would love for Microsoft to do something. I don't think they're doing it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would love for somewhere there to be the security tables from Dataverse exposed so you could kind of continue onwards that journey. So if you've set up teams and business units and all those lovely things that go with security models in Dynamics, it would be great if you could expose us to onwards apps to try and kind of leverage that AAD kind of journey of making sure that the person who sees it here also can see it in the downstream system. So not a great answer to the question, because I don't think it's a single answer to that question. I think it will depend on your use case. If you're in an environment where everyone shares everything and all your records in Dataverse are read-only organization, you probably don't have a problem. If you're in a lockdown environment, so I come from banking before I changed my life, it really would have been a problem for anyone outside of the data team to have access to all of that information. And in that instance, yes, they created their security model inside Power BI and then really locked down who could get to it at Power BI, and no one could get to those blobs.